we want to thank Paul Workman today for joining us. Paul is a Texas state representative, and of course, as you can imagine, because of our very long border with Mexico, we have a lot of human and sex trafficking issues here, which he has had the view on in his job. For those of you in Austin, Paul is an Aggie, but we won't hold that against him. And he was actually in construction when he left A&M and was also in the U.S. Army Reserves and still owns a commercial construction company, but has been in the legislature now for 6 years. And, of course, that's a very full-time job. So I'm going to not dwell too much on your background, Paul. If you want to share some more, feel free. But otherwise, I'd like to turn it over to you because I know I've got a preview of the slides, and you've got some great information to share on the topic of human and sex trafficking. So thank you to Paul Workman for joining us today.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's my honor to be able to talk about a very serious issue here in the state of Texas and indeed around the nation. It's a human trafficking and sex trafficking is a scourge on our society, and it's a difficult thing to deal with, but it's something that we have to deal with on both the state level and the national level. And as Debbie mentioned, because of our long border with Mexico, there is maybe more human trafficking here than pretty much anywhere else in the nation. And so it's a big deal, a big issue here for the state of Texas. So, the Polaris Project kind of put it best when they said human trafficking is a form of modern slavery, a multi-billion-dollar criminal industry that denies freedom to over 20 million people around the world. And look, no matter where you live, chances are it's happening close, from the girl forced into prostitution at a truck stop to the man discovered in a restaurant kitchen, stripped of his passport and held against his will. And all trafficking victims share one essential experience, and that is the loss of freedom. So it is going on in the state of Texas and around our country. And we'll go to the next slide. We'll talk about the types of trafficking under Texas law. We've got several laws. One of them that we passed this last session was referred to as House Bill 10, and it took the sex trafficking, human trafficking, and cleaned up some of the statutes and clarified those under Texas law. So we have 4 basic types: trafficking adults forced into labor, whether it's in agriculture, food service, or some other type of work; trafficking of adults for sex in strip clubs, brothels, massage parlors, on the street, or internet-type prostitution. Third would be trafficking of children under the age of 18 for forced labor. And lastly, trafficking of children under the age of 18 for sex. And, any individual can be trafficked into an industry or any type of work. It happens all across. And legally, someone is considered trafficked if force, fraud, or coercion is applied to make them do something that they wouldn't otherwise do. So we have a lot of that. The cartels down in Mexico, that's one of the big issues. One of the big sources of income is human trafficking, whether it's just the coyotes that bring them across, but they also a lot of times force those people into work in trafficking with humans as well. So sex trafficking of children, we're on the next slide now, and the definition is a child under the age of 18 is a victim of sex trafficking if they are being prostituted by someone other than themselves, and it's regardless of whether the child complied with the trafficker's demands or whether they actively resisted the force. But it's still considered sex trafficking, and it can be completed by any means, and does not necessarily require the use of force, fraud, or coercion. And children in sex trafficking, they get there in a number of different ways. There are a lot of runaways in the state of Texas that wind up being in prostitution and sex trafficking. And a lot of times those children are starving for love and affection, and so that is one of the ways that they are brought into it. So and the promise of romance, love, or acceptance is there. Offers of cash, of course, places to stay, independence, or a glamorous lifestyle is often offered to them. And sometimes they're persuaded by a peer who's already involved in that. And a lot of times, they're hungry and they're cold, and so the person that's doing the sex trafficking is meeting the needs of those children, whether it's food, clothing, or shelter, or even love. So that happens. When we have the runaways in particular, a lot of those situations are very desperate, and they're from broken homes and homes that they're not loved, or they don't feel like they're loved, and so the people engaged in sex trafficking take advantage of that vulnerability in a desperate situation. And of course, they use flattery, lies, manipulation, deception, and everything else they can use to convince them to do that. And once they're in there, there's this position of power, and they exploit that to help keep them in. A lot of times they make them offers that they really are just too good to be true, and they most of the time don't fulfill those. So those are some of the common methods for recruiting children into sex trafficking, and it's happening a lot. There's a group in Harris County that kind of monitors this situation, and the comment that the head of this group made was that in Harris County there were some 160 storefronts that were innocuous-looking storefronts that were really housing sex trafficking, whether it's children or adults, and it's amazing that there are that many in Harris County that is going on. So I'm sorry?
Well, for those who are not from Texas, Harris County's over towards Houston.
Yes, that's the Houston area. All right.
That's a huge amount of storefronts for sure. The other thing, let me say, because I forgot to say, if you all would please silence your cell phones or other things. I thought I heard some music on hold, so if somebody can knock that out, that would be appreciated. Okay, continue.
Okay, thank you. And I'm glad to stop and answer any questions anytime, so just interrupt me, I guess. But there are red flags that are common to the sex trafficking and human trafficking trades, and so you can kind of look at those and see whether it's somebody whose schedule is controlled by some third party or social interaction, and people who seem to be isolated from their community or the family or friends, and then of course evidence of violence, whether it be bruising or swelling or scarring or whatever. And then a lot of the people that are put into this are branded in not with a hot iron brand, but whether with a tattoo, so that they are it's clear who they belong to, and so that is a flag. And of course, they furnish them a lot of times with sexually provocative clothing that's inappropriate for the situation or the weather. They move around a lot, and there's erratic schedules, so they might be able to see something like that. Inability to speak English is another flag, and the common misconception is that a lot of these children, in particular, that are put into sex trafficking are little 13-year-old Chinese kids that are put on a boat and sent over here for the sex trade, but that's not always the case. There are a lot of runaways that are domestic young ladies that are put into this. But if you come across someone who can't speak English, then that may be a flag for human trafficking. And if they don't have identification documents, if they say, well, somebody else has got my ID, then that might also be a flag. And then, of course, just a lack of knowledge about the community they're in might indicate that they were new to the area and brought in for that purpose. They may be malnourished or dehydrated, or they may be exhausted. And so other physical type things, dizziness, headaches, things like that might also indicate that there's a problem. And some of them, of course, have chronic diseases that go untreated. They may have dental issues or visual problems. So there are a lot of physical-related things that could be a flag for someone who's in human trafficking. This makes it particularly important for our healthcare providers as they see people that come in, whether it's in the emergency room or minor emergency center or perhaps an abortion clinic, to be looking for these kinds of signs for people who might be in human trafficking. And, of course, a lot of those apply also for children. And when you get to children, there are other red flags like changes in their school attendance habit. They may be going to school and then just kind of all of a sudden kind of drop out for a couple of weeks, and they may be off doing things that someone who's put them in that situation has them doing. And, of course, you know, who they're hanging around with, their groups, their interest in school activities, what kind of vocabulary they use, and what their demeanor is, all can be indications of children in human trafficking. And when you see, you know, a 12 or a 13-year-old girl having luxury items, things that you wouldn't normally expect them to have, designer clothing and purses, and, you know, they're not from an area where you would expect that kind of thing, this could be a red flag. And I mentioned truancy, that, you know, they may not be attending school like they should. So, and again, of course, sexually provocative clothing, and yes, they are branded with tattoos and stuff as well. So those are all kinds of things that need to be looked for in children, along with some other items that I wanted to mention, including, you know, having a child finding out that they've got a hotel key card, and, you know, wouldn't be something you would expect them to have. And they may get paid with a gift card, so they may have a refillable gift card that somebody has given them. They may have phones when it might not be appropriate for them to have a phone, or they may have more than one phone, and they have several social media accounts. So things like that could be it. And then, you know, their behavior or response to questioning about that, whether they're lying about those accounts or, you know, refusing their parental access to those kind of things. And, you know, if you could get a chance to look at their phones and what's on their phone, whether they've got sexually provocative photographs and things like that that they shouldn't have on their phone or their online accounts. And again, we mentioned the physical issues, and the same type of thing would be there, whether it's bruising, swelling, redness, you know, things that you wouldn't expect to see on a 12, 13-year-old child. And then a lot of times, of course, they don't have IDs, and if they run away, you know, multiple times, then there's a chance that they may be engaged in, you know, human trafficking, sex trafficking. And one of the items that's not on the slide that I wanted to mention having to do with seeking abortion with someone other than their parents. And so we actually passed legislation in Texas this last time which requires abortion providers and resource pregnancy people to be trained on how to look for these red flags that we talked about in that, to try to find out if a young woman that's coming in for those types of services may be a victim of human trafficking. So those are some of the things that you might look for on children and human trafficking. So before I get into some more of the data about this, is there any questions or anything anyone might have on what I've indicated so far?
Paul, are you at all familiar with the Children's Safety Network?
I know a little bit about the Children's Safety Network, not a lot really, but I do know about that.
Okay. They're making some good strides in this area.
Yes, and that was something that we needed to provide a place for children to be able to call anonymously and seek help, and that's one of the things I think they're doing.
Yes.
Okay.
About what percentage would you say are out of your four groupings? We had kids and adults in sex trade, and then we had kids and adults in kind of commercial activities. About how much of what percent falls into those two groups, sex versus trade?
Okay. Well, we're going to talk about that in just a minute with some of the statistics that I've got here, so I can go over that, and I'll get to that in just a moment.
Okay. Actually, I've got one more then, and I'll hold the other one. This seems so unreal that we would have kids right under our nose being trafficked. So, for example, I mean, almost all of us on the call probably have families. Do you suspect there are kids, hopefully not our own, but friends of our kids who are in this circumstance?
Well, I would hope not, of course, but we've all encountered parents who've got children who, for whatever reason, they've had trouble with them and they've run away, and I've got a friend whose daughter went missing for a few days, and they finally found her, and thank God it was not this situation when they found her, but she was just upset with her parents and went off somewhere. But I think it happens, and we just have to be on the alert for it and look for it. And I'm sure it's very difficult for parents who have a child who may be a runaway to face the prospect of that happening to their own children. But hopefully, if we can show the signs that may be an indication of this sort of thing, that they'd be able to help get them out of that situation if they're in it.
Thanks. Do we have any other questions at this point?
All right, so there's
effective
Wait a minute, I think I hear one.
What are your most effective tools at the child level, that's under 18? Programs, if you will, not tools.
Yeah, I think the most effective thing is for teachers in the schools to have training to look for these signs so that they can intervene if they believe that there's a problem. And of course, we don't want to go overboard with doing stuff when we're just not sure. But I think the most effective thing is for our school teachers to have good training on identifying the signs of a child that may be involved in this. So there's a National Human Trafficking Resource Center that is out there that has a place for reporting human trafficking cases. There have been over 6,000 calls so far this year, from January to the end of March, to that center, with over 1,600 human trafficking cases already reported. And if you extend that out, that means that we're going to have over 6,600 cases for the year of 2016. And that's hard to imagine, but it is. And so far this year, the top 5 states are California with 305 reports. Unfortunately, Texas is second at 141. Florida behind us at 136. Ohio and New York rounding out the top 5. And, but given the size of our states, it's not surprising that California, Texas, and Florida, Ohio, and New York would be those top 5s. There are the victims are about 1,400 female victims and a little under 200 male victims. Most of them are adults, over 1,000 cases of adult victims, with 546, so about 2 to 1 adult over minors, but there's still a lot of minors. Over 444 American citizens or lawful permanent residents here, with 270 foreign nationals. That concept that I mentioned earlier, that we tend to think of human trafficking as being someone from another part of the world who's brought in for that sort of thing. There are actually a lot more Americans that are involved in that. So, and then you look at the types of trafficking, which was asked about earlier. About 1,220 cases are related to sex, and 200 cases are related to just labor trafficking. And then, of course, there are some combined where sex and labor are put together. And then another 166 cases where the type of trafficking was not really specified. So it's pretty much largely a sex trafficking issue, although there are other cases as well. And in the labor type of trafficking, there's a variety of types of things. So domestic work, someone who gets their maid provided, and they put them essentially into trafficking for labor. Traveling sales crews, restaurant services, food, agriculture, of course, is one you would expect, and then health and beauty service is also one that's in there. In the sex trafficking, there are a lot of these hostess and strip club-based deal, 144 of those cases, but I mentioned earlier about the commercial front brothels. These are the innocuous-looking retail centers in a strip, and they, got some 140 of those cases reported so far this year nationally. And then there are others in lesser amounts, online ad and internet sex trafficking, and street-based, of course, just ladies on the street, and then actually residential brothels. Some 69 cases are in there. So it's a pretty widespread problem around the U.S., and we certainly have our issues here in Texas. So what kind of person engages in this? Believe it or not, it can be family or relatives that do this, and of course their peers. There are a number of international third-party recruiters out there that are doing it, and unscrupulous employers, actually. And the biggest problem here in Texas is organized crime syndicates, the cartels and gangs who put these people into this type of situation. Strip club owners, of course, do some of this, and then, of course, occasional opportunistic criminal and their partners, sometimes intimate partners, believe it or not, neighbors and friends, and then the buyers who pay for children under the 18 or adults who are being forced into prostitution. So what do we do about this? And, as I said, in the state of Texas, we have clarified some of the statutes in the state of Texas to try to make sure that we can help these. We actually passed some statutes a couple of sessions ago which said that just when a young lady is arrested for prostitution, that she's not automatically assumed to be a criminal, but is kind of automatically assumed to be a victim until it's proven otherwise, and trying to get these young ladies out of this situation, or in some cases young men, but they're assumed to be a victim, not a criminal. And so we're working on trying to do that. If you believe that you see someone that may be a victim of trafficking, you need to, of course, report it. And if there's immediate danger, you think, then, of course, you'd call 911. But there is the National Trafficking Hotline number, which I don't know if everybody can see the screen, but the number is 888-3737-888, and that's something that you can call if you suspect that someone might be in that situation. And you need to do that as soon as, repeat the number, is 888-3737-888. If you observe something like that, then you certainly would try to make a call sooner rather than later while the information is current. Law enforcement, it's hard for them to act on stale information, so we need to try to do that. Don't try to intervene yourself, of course, and allow the law enforcement to respond to those issues. So that kind of wraps up the thing. There are some resources that are listed there: the National Human Trafficking Resource Center, the Polaris Project, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is listed there, and you can Google those and see what those resources are. And so, if there are any other questions, I'm happy to try to answer those.
Okay, let's open up for questions then. I'll ask one, Paul. What is the Polaris Project?
Well, the Polaris Project is a group that is working on the whole human trafficking situation nationally, and they're just a group of volunteers that are trying to reduce the amount of human trafficking in the United States.
Okay.
Where's that headquartered?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure where they're headquartered out of.
And do you know if all three of these resources, I guess, are working together probably, or?
I think they are working together. We certainly expect them to be, and I think they probably are working together.
Other questions? I'm curious, when something gets reported, does that then get turned over to the local authorities, I guess, for research and action?
Yes, if it's reported, then they would, they would be turned over to law enforcement. If it's, if there's a suspicion of sex trafficking or human trafficking, yes, it's going to go over to law enforcement for sure. So, and the Polaris Project is out of Washington D.C. So.
What other questions do folks have?
Well, thank you very much. It's been great to be able to talk about this issue, and we will be continuing to work on this here at the state of Texas. And if any of you would like to visit about this, then I'm certainly happy to do that at any time.
Let's just see one more round of questions. Anybody? I think I heard somebody.
I just wanted to comment that it's excellent information, and I think we'll all probably hold on to this.
Well, good.
Yeah, do you have any anecdotes or stories you could share this? I know you've shared a lot of information already, but just maybe a story or two that would help bring this to life for us?
Oh, no, I don't know that I can accurately reflect on any of the stories that I've heard at this point. It'd probably be better if I tried not to do that. But I was most taken by, this group called the Elijah Project in Harris County, whose mission it is to try to expose these storefront brothels that are engaging in human trafficking, and some of the stories that person related in our hearing were heart-wrenching, and it's very sad. A lot of these, particularly the young ladies, are having to go through. So.
Other thoughts from anybody?
All right. Well, thank you again for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Okay. Thanks so much, Paul. We appreciate the info.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right.